When it comes to the concept of ButterSynth, well, it's a hybrid synthesizer with 4 different types of oscillators and also different types of synthesis methods. It's mixing wavetable, FM, and subtractive synthesis. It also has sample playing capabilities, whereas one of them is granular, plus a noise generator. You can mix these any way you want, and you can run them through 2 filter slots with a bunch of different filter modules. Now, I do want to highlight though that when it comes to the wavetable oscillators, these are incredibly powerful, and with them you can make and modify your own waveforms and large wavetables, and you can also import stuff from external sources. ButterSynth even supports loading serum format wavetable files. It just keeps going from there, because once you start getting into modulation, you're gonna realize that you have a ton of it, ton of sources, and a sick amount of destinations. ButterSynth also comes with an effect rack, and it has a large amount of different types of effects that you can put in your patches. And on top of that, you have oversampling that you can turn on for all oscillators, getting an even higher quality sound out of the synthesizer, at the expense of hardware resources, of course. That's just the nature of the game. And when it comes to presets, ButterSynth comes packed with hundreds of them, made by artists from within the iOS mobile music community, so you're gonna recognize a few names. I've even donated some presets myself, not as many as these guys here, but if you need more, I do have a preset pack that I've been working on the past 9 months for as long as I've been testing the synthesizer. It's called ButterSynth 2084, and it's in the same genre as the previous 2 preset packs I released for Timeless 3 and Turbo Synthesizer. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Jakob. I'm your host, and I'm a music producer from Sweden. And next to Sweden, if you go across the ocean here, we have Finland. And why am I telling you this? Well, here is where ButterSynth was made, by Arto. And I probably butchered it, but it's the closest I can get to a Finnish pronunciation. Either way, Arto tells me that he's been working as a software engineer since the early 2000s, and that iOS music app making is a hobby at the moment. Now, some of you might actually recognize his company name, because he has released an app previously on iOS back in 2015 called Cream, and this was initially a desktop app. But he decided to port it over because he was curious to see if it was possible. And that app port was the start of Arto's curiosity about app development, which then led to ButterSynth. But more about that later on. Let's just dive into the features of ButterSynth. starting on the first page, up here we have 4-page switchers. Right now we're inside oscillator, then we got matrix, control, and effects. We're gonna jump back to the oscillator here, where we have our audio generating capabilities down here. 5 oscillators and 1 noise generator. And if we look at the oscillator section, we got 2 extremely deep wavetable synthesis engines. If I press edit here, there's a bunch of stuff that can be done. Now the wavetable engine is extremely powerful, and I do have an in-depth look at these wavetable engines, but I need to highlight something first. Look here. Here you can see it says 256. These boxes can hold waveforms, so you can make wavetables with up to 256 waveforms. Well, you can have very large wavetables in here, and you can make all of the waveforms yourself. You have so many different tools at your disposal for drawing in and brushing in, doing curves in here. You can work harmonically with up to 1,000 bands, and you can even change the phase for all of these bands. This thing is insane. On top of that, you have effects so that you can further process the waveforms you draw in here, and whatever you make in here, you can save. You can save single waveforms and you can save multi waveforms. Apart from the 2 wavetable oscillators, we have a fully featured 4-operator FM synthesizer engine with a bunch of algorithms in here. It's like having an entire FM synth inside your synth. Now, if there's something to highlight with the FM oscillator, it is that it really does come with all the bells and whistles. Since you can modulate anything in here, even though you only have access to 1 amp envelope, well, you can use any one of the envelopes through modulation to modulate each and every one of the different operators in here. Another thing is that if we look over here where it says ratio, well, we can switch this over to feedback and run feedback on every operator. And what can you do with that? Well, some really cool stuff. So right here, I have a wavetable oscillator. It's playing a sawtooth waveform, and I'm running it through a filter. Now check this out. I'm going to turn this off, turn on the FM oscillator. I've got 1 operator running using a sine wave, and I've got this switched over to feedback. Listen to this. We're not using a filter. Still, it sounds like subtractive synthesis with a sawtooth waveform. This sounds so incredibly clean. I'm impressed, Arto. On top of that, we have 2 sample-based engines. One of them is very straightforward. Now, what is there to highlight with this thing? Well, actually, there's not much. What you see in here is modulatable, but it really is a straightforward sample player. You load a sample and you play that sample. And ButterSynth does tie into the Files app, so if you have files stored anywhere, it's easy to get to them.
There was a young man from Nantucket whose so long he could...
Now, the second sample-based oscillator is the granulator one, which is just what it sounds like. It's a granular synthesis engine. Now, when it comes to the controls you have inside the granulator here, one thing I want to highlight are these two random knobs over here, because this random knob will change the start and ending position for the sampling granules, and this volume randomization will just randomize the volume, and I love features like this. Lastly, we have the noise generator, and since it has its own filter, we can, on top of the white and pink noise, also produce a wide range of other types of noise. Now, there are two things I really want to lift here, and that is when it comes to the Wavetable 1, 2, sample, and granulator oscillators. They all have this 7-voice unison mode. And also, I know I've mentioned that you can modulate stuff inside these things here. Well, whatever you see on screen here can be modulated. Now, if we pop over to this section over here, we have 4 amp envelopes. And the way that you use these with the oscillators is really simple. You select what envelope you want to use over here. All oscillators have this section here, even the noise section. You kind of route it the same way with the filters. If you look over here, you can see that you have a filter section. The noise section has that too. And so if you want to send an oscillator to a certain filter, then you just select it like this. Of course, you can run both filters in parallel, or you can run both filters in serial mode if you just do this. Now, the filters are down here, filter A and B, and if we go into the filter list, in here we can find low pass, high pass, notch, peak, band pass, and comb filter modes, including a special 303 type filter down here, and they're all spread out over 18 modules. Really powerful. A nice thing is that the filter has a drive knob that works with all of the filters. And then lastly, we have the main volume out and voicing settings. You can turn this synth into a monosynth just by tapping that. Here you can also set your main tempo, and this will lock to the tempo of the host if you're loading ButterSynth as an AUV3, but if you're loading it as a standalone, you of course have to set your own tempo. There's a legato mode and a porta setting here too, and yeah, pretty straightforward. Next, we're gonna jump over to the matrix, where we have 32 slots that we can set up modulation in. There's 8 slots on each page, and you have 4 buttons down here, 1 to 8, 9 to 16, and on and on and on. Now, the way you set up modulation, well, you can do it the old-fashioned way by going in here and just selecting whatever source you want and then selecting whatever destination you want. However, Arto has implemented a nice feature. Let's say we wanted to use amp envelope 2 here to control the cutoff of the filter. All we have to do is to long press on the cutoff until this list pops up, and then just look for amp envelope 2, and it's right over here. Select that. And if we go to the matrix, we can see that it's set up over here. And here we can now fine adjust our settings. We can run it in reverse by turning them around like this. We can set our amount like this, fine tune it like this. And if we look over here, we have modes and curves. And this is the behavior of the modulation. And what I really like is the curve, because here we can choose how the values get inputted into whatever thing we're modulating. All in all, this is very, very powerful. And when it comes to the modulation in here, you have about 32 different types of modulation sources. That's a lot of sources. And when it comes to the destinations, well, if we open this up, it looks like a short list of destinations, but then there are sub-menu items. And all in all, you actually have about 200 plus destinations that you can send all of this modulation to. That's a ton of destinations. So what do we actually have to modulate with? Well, apart from the amp envelope over here, which can be used as modulation, if we go to the control page, we have an XY pad. And here we can actually do a recording of our animation here and run that as modulation. Then we have 4 LFOs here, and these are always tied to a tempo. We have 4 macro controls that we can use. And if we look down here, we have something really, really sweet. I love this. So we've got something called a curve envelope. And this is really an LFO that can be used as an envelope. You can double tap in here to make new points, and you can bend these lines any way you want. You can lock them to a grid if you want that. You can run them backwards, forwards, and you can make some really interesting shapes in here. On top of that, you have 4 step sequencers that you can use. And remember, all of this modulation can be sent to 200 plus destinations. You can set it anywhere. Now, there's a nice feature I want to show you, and that is whenever you see these buttons here. You see, it can be kind of hard to work in a small window like this, but you don't have to. If you press this, you get a bigger window, and now it's easier to do your work in here. Now, lastly, we have an arpeggiator. So if you're playing an arpeggio with 3 notes in it, well, you can program it so it plays chords in the middle of it too. If you look up here, you can see that for a lot of these things, you can actually save your settings. You can save your arpeggiator settings, save your curve settings, your step sequencer settings. You can sync these in different ways. There's just so much you can do in here. It's insane. So if we go to the last page, which is the FX page, in here, there is a bunch of effects. we can find 10 different types of effects and or processor types, and they're spread out over 16 modules. So you can find them in a sliding list like this, and the way that you add them to your patch is by tapping and holding on one and then dragging it out in here and letting it go. And that's basically how you add them. Now, if you want to change order of something, you have this little button here. You just tap down, hold, and drag the thing you want to drag until you see this yellow line, and then you've changed the order of them. In here you can find filters, compressors, distortions, crusher effect, chorus delay, 3 different types of reverbs, and even phaser. A whole lot of effects. And the only thing I don't like is that some of the reverbs can sound a bit metallic at times, and that's about the only real complaint I have with the synth. It's the reverb, but I'm very, very anal about my reverbs. A quick note here. Now, a month has passed since I recorded the bit you just heard, and I've been chatting with Arto about this because he knows I feel like this about the reverbs, and he said he will continue improving the reverbs after the release. And I said, why don't you just keep them the way they are? Because I kind of like the fact that they do have an overall unique sound to them. They sound special. And I'd rather just see a new reverb module being added to the rack in the future. Now, we'll see what Arto does, but I just wanted to bring this to your attention and highlight the fact that Arto does listen to the user base. Now, I was really curious about the inspiration behind ButterSynth and why Arto made it. You see, after releasing Cream, he started thinking about how hard it would be to make an audio plugin. And although Cream had a simple internal synth, audio programming wasn't really his strongest skill. Now, when it comes to the inspiration, he mentions some synths he was using at the time to make music with, like Synth 1, Silence, and Serum. All of these are desktop apps, by the way. Now, one thing that I'm always interested in hearing about is basically struggles and challenges that developers come across while developing their apps. And when I asked Arto about that and the development cycle of ButterSynth, he basically said, and I quote, "I think there were no easy problems," old school smile emoji. "Everything is hard when dealing with DSP code done with C++ code. I think the most difficult thing was to make the synth's audio as clean as possible while making the CPU consumption as low as possible and not sacrificing any crucial features by removing them." I had a couple more questions for Arto, but you'll hear about that later on. Let's dive into the wavetable oscillators. Okay, so the first thing I want to highlight is the waveform display up here. Right now we've got a sawtooth waveform loaded. But if you look closer, you can see some arrows here. And if we press them, we can actually go through the entire library inside the synth without ever really opening the browser. But if we wanted to load something specific, we just go into the browser, and here we have a big library of waveforms to choose from. We got basic ones like saw, square, triangle, sine, and then we've got some other folders here: analog, classic, complex, drawn, and also adventure kit. And the adventure kit folder is one I want to highlight because the waveforms in here have been taken from a site that has a huge library of single cycle waveform samples that you can download for free. So if you want some other waveforms, you can just download that library and put it into your iOS files system. Once you have it there, you can then access it from this browser if you go to Open Files app. And if we look here, then we can see that I've put this folder inside my audio share files. Well, if I locate the folder called akwf right over here, enter it, we can see a library of waveforms. If I enter this one here and just press here, it's now loaded into the wavetable oscillator. Now, any waveform that you make, modify, and or load can be saved in the wavetable library. And once you've got it saved in your wavetable library, you can then load those waveforms into the wavetable oscillators and also the FM operator. So yeah, you already have a huge library of waveforms to choose from, and you can also load waveforms from external sources. But if you're not happy with those and you want to make your own, well, you can do that inside the edit menu. So we can see the waveform right here, and here is where you get to draw your own stuff. We also have a harmonic overview of the waveforms right here, and you can draw in here too. You can have up to 256 waveforms in a wavetable, but that's a lot, and usually I only go for about 16. Over here we have the effects menu, and you can use these effects to further modify the waveform in here. So right now we got the saw loaded, but if we pull up on the tube here, I love this effect, especially when making bass, because if I go down an octave here, you can hear how the waveform takes on more of a square kind of character. I just love when it gets mushy like that. And as you can see, the background shows what's happening to the waveform as you modify it. And if I do this and I head out of here, we can actually see that shape. Now, if we go to configuration, we can find 4 drawing tools. The first one allows you to draw your waveforms with lines like this. The pen one allows you to draw stuff freely by freehand. Freehand? By freehand? But if you don't like the jaggedness of drawing with the pen tool, you can use the brush tool, which works kind of like the pen tool, but it's more smoothed out. And lastly, we have the curving tool, and this one works exactly like the curve envelopes. You double tap to add or remove nodes, and then you can bend the lines in between the nodes. Now, to actually make a wavetable, the way you do it is by going down here, pressing a plus sign, and then make sure you select the next waveform, and then you just modify it. Press plus, modify this one. Press plus, modify this one. And now we have a wavetable with 4 waveforms in it. And if we close this window down, we can now sweep between those waveforms with the wavetable position right here. And this can, of course, be modulated with all of the modulation sources. Now, if we head back into the editor again, then we have one more menu up here, which is called Tools. In here, we have editing options like marking and deleting, copying, saving, and we can also resample the synth output. And let's say we resample the synth output to 16, then it will fill up these boxes for us, and we can then go and modify these any way we want. This is a very quick way of making a wavetable with 16 waveforms in them. As you can see, there's a ton you can do with waveform editing and building wavetables. And it doesn't stop there, because there are stuff here on the front page that allows you to further modify your waveforms and wavetables. I'm just going to go up here to the browser and press initialize, set everything to 0, and now we got a sawtooth waveform loaded again. There is one knob here called harmonics. If you remove all the harmonics out of any complex waveform, you'll end up with a sine wave. And if you want to understand how that works, then you should go and watch this video here, because it helps you understand the topic of harmonics. Well, it doesn't stop with the harmonics knob. We also have phase modulation. And if we look inside here, there is a ton of stuff. We got pulse width modulation, mirroring, bit crushing. We can bend the width and height of the waveform. We have 3 different sync modes, and we also have FM modes here, basically allowing you to do some FM synthesis. Now, apart from phase modulation, we also have wavefolding, and in here we can find 3 different modes. Now, the last thing I want to show you is the FM synthesis one. For this, we need 2 oscillators, because with FM synthesis, we are modulating the frequency of one oscillator or operator with another. So we need to turn on Wavetable 2, but I don't want to hear it. I just want to use the frequency from this one to modulate the frequency of Wavetable 1. So I'm going to pull down on the volume here, and then I'm going to go up to Wavetable 1 here and go into this list of phase modulation and choose Wavetable 2 FM. Lastly, we have a phase knob up here that allows you to switch the phase of the waveform. Well, during this entire tutorial, we were actually just using a sawtooth waveform, but with the help of different tools, we made it sound like anything but a sawtooth waveform. This is the power of the Wavetable oscillators. They're extremely powerful. There's just so much you can do in them, and I absolutely love this thing. Now, when I asked Arto about the future of ButterSynth, he said that he will continue fixing bugs, but he will also start implementing some feature requests that were made during the beta testing phase, like a sample oscillator editor and also improving the wavetable editor. Now, it's pretty funny because Arto started out on desktop and then ported a desktop app over to iOS, and then he released another app which is iOS only. So I was of course curious to hear if he was even planning on porting ButterSynth over to desktop. And he said that his initial plan was actually to implement a desktop and the iOS version at the same time, but there simply wasn't any time for it, so he decided against it. However, if there is enough interest on the desktop side, Arto will port the synth over. First, we're going to track the position of a wavetable with the keyboard. Next, we're going to set up a modulated drunken pitchiness. And then we're going to set up the modulation wheel so that we can control the amount of drunken pitchiness we're getting in the patch. Let's begin with the wavetable tracking. So we got Wavetable 1 turned on, and we need to go into the browser and select Combi Morph, which you can find inside the basic folder. This one contains more than one waveform. Now, the trick to this is to move this wavetable position knob, but not with an LFO or anything like that. We're gonna use the keyboard. So when we're playing different notes, we're playing different positions inside the wavetable. So to do that, what I usually do is I set up the wavetable position knob in a way where I have a lot of space to move both up and down in the wavetable. So next, we need to set up the keyboard to actually control this. So we can do that by long pressing on the wavetable position knob, go down here and find the note key. The keyboard is now tracking this wavetable position knob. And what's so cool about this is that this is happening per a note basis. So if we're playing 3 notes at the same time, they're all playing different waveforms because they're all playing different positions in the wavetable. And that's a very interesting way of building a patch, especially if you're using wavetables with a lot of waveforms in them. So let's go into the matrix. And right now we can see that we've only got a max value set up. Well, we're gonna go into the extremes here because I really want you to hear what you can do with this. So this allows us to play the entire wavetable across the entire keyboard if we want. And so now, if I play the keyboard like I did before, we're getting completely different waveforms. And if I play 3 notes here, I just love this. So that's the first part of the sound. For the next part, we need to make the pitch wobble. And what we're going to do is to build a specific wobble, kind of like a tape wobble for the pitch. So we need to be able to control rates of LFOs, but we're not going to be using LFOs. And I usually like building these patches in a way where I can get all of the oscillators pitching. And instead of setting up 5 modulation slots for that, we can just set up 1 modulation slot in where we're controlling the pitch for the entire synth. So we go into Matrix, we select the next empty slot, which is modulation slot 2, go into destination, into this list, and go down until we find main. Now inside main we can find pitch all oscillators, and we select that one. Next we need to select our source. And as I said, we're not going to be using LFOs, and the reason to that is because we want to cross-connect modulation sources so that we can get a rate that is moving in an unconventional way. We don't just want it to move up and down in a constant speed. And the LFOs inside ButterSynth are always tied to a tempo. However, the curve envelopes, which can be used as LFOs, have 2 settings. One where they're tied to tempo, which is their initial state, but as soon as we select free run, we're now disconnecting it from the tempo sync, and the curve envelope can now move from down to 10-second cycles up to 0.10 second cycle. Now we're gonna put it around 1.5 seconds like this, and then go back to the matrix. So we're gonna go into the source and select curve envelope 1. And now I'm gonna increase the minimum and maximum values, and we're gonna be able to hear the pitch actually wobble. And a good practice here is to set up the minimum and maximum values at the same amount so that they can move up in pitch and down in pitch the same amount. If you don't do it like that, if you do more maximum and less minimum, well, it basically puts it in a way so that the pitch gets kind of shifted off center. Now this is a lot, I know, and in the end what we'll be using is just a little bit of modulation. So if we adjust the amount, we're getting something closer to the end result we want. Now, before we continue, what I'm going to do is go back to the oscillator here and put the octave up. So it'll be easier for us to hear what we're doing. So we've just set it up so that the main pitch of the synth is wobbling up and down in pitch, but it's doing it in a very consistent way, and we don't want that. To achieve something more akin to a tape-like wobble, we need to do some intricate stuff with the curve envelopes. And the first thing we're gonna do is to set it up so that we're controlling the rate of curve envelope 1 with another curve envelope. So we're gonna choose curve envelope 2 here in the source in modulation slot 3, go into the destination, go down into curve envelopes here, and make sure that we're controlling the free rate of curve envelope 1. Now, if I increase the mount here with the maximum and go into the control section, once I start playing this, you're gonna see something weird happening with the speed of curve envelope 1. It's now moving almost like it's moving back and forth, but it is actually because of the speed of curve envelope 2. Now, if I pull this down a little bit and we go back to curve envelope 1 here and play again, we're getting something very interesting happening. And now I'm going to show you a little trick here. We're going to go into curve envelope 2 here. We're going to pull this line down and have it move a little bit, and then we're gonna add a little shark fin here, like this, and look what happens now with curve envelope 1 when we play it. What we're gonna do next is we're gonna do some weird stuff with curve envelope 1, because right now it's moving up and down in pitch in a consistent way. But if we add some modulation here, we're gonna get some other types of pitching. And let's go into the matrix here and increase the amount that the curve envelope is actually controlling the pitch. You can hear that, right? It starts sounding crazy. Next, we're gonna set up a control for controlling the amount of this wobbliness with the modulation wheel. To do that, we need to control modulation slot amounts. And in this case, it is modulation slot 2 because it is actually the thing controlling how much our sound is being pitched. The first thing we're gonna do is to go to an empty modulation slot, and we're gonna select the modulation wheel in the source. In the destination, we need to select the modulation amount knob for slot 2. So we go into destination. Okay, that's weird. The list is not showing all the way. I think I found a bug. I'm gonna report that to Arto. Either way, we need to go down to the modulation menu, which is right here, modulation matrix. Open that up. Oh, there, the list works again. And then go down to modulation slot amount 2. This allows us to control this knob with the modulation wheel. Now, the first thing we need to do is to pull down the amount of modulation slot 2 completely, so we have no pitch at all. Because I want to be able to go from no wobbliness up to maximum wobbliness with the modulation wheel. Next, I put the modulation wheel to the maximum so I can set up the maximum amount of wobble that I want. And I do this by playing notes and then increasing the maximum value here. And now we can actually control the amount of this wobbliness. So if I pull the modulation wheel all the way down, we have none. And if I pull it up, now, the patch does not sound that good yet, and that is because I've over-exaggerated all of the values. And the trick to a patch like this, where we're trying to get tape wobble with bits of maybe tape chew in it, is to use small values. You don't want to overdo things. Now, I took what we've made here, I've gone over all of the modulation points, fine adjusted everything, and then I just added a filter, a delay, and a reverb. The first thing I want to show you is the key zone editor, and we can get to that if we enter the range menu up here. Now, to the right, we can see the editor, and this is really easy to use, and it gives us the ability to set up certain ranges for keyboards and the individual oscillators. To map an oscillator to a certain range, all you have to do is to make sure you have a MIDI keyboard connected to ButterSynth, and it can be a virtual keyboard or it could be an external hardware keyboard. And then to map up the key zones, all you do is to activate a start point, press a key, and then activate an end point, and press a key. And as you saw, I just mapped Wavetable Oscillator 1 so that it's only able to play when you're playing between C3 and C4. And what's nice about this is that all of the key mappings you set up here gets saved with presets. By the way, don't forget to enable it after you're done setting it up, otherwise it won't work. Now, to the left here we have the MIDI CC mapper, and this will list all of the MIDI mappings you've done. But you can pretty much ignore this and the internal MIDI learn system inside ButterSynth when you're using it as an AUV3, because if you want to set up MIDI mappings for an AUV3, you should go through the AUV3 MIDI parameter tree. All DAWs have their own system. However, when you're using ButterSynth as a standalone unit, you'll have settings for MIDI inputs inside the cogwheel menu under MIDI, and you then use the internal MIDI mapping system, and it basically works like modulation. So you long press on stuff that you want to control with an external MIDI controller, press on the option MIDI learn, tweak a knob, and it's learned. Now, speaking about the cogwheel menu, there is one thing I want to show you in here. Here is where you can find the options for oversampling. All oscillators, including the distortion effect plugin, has oversampling. And this basically makes the oscillators sound better. However, Just remember that when you are increasing the oversampling, you are also increasing the workload for your iDevice. Over 30 years ago, I got into this whole music thing because I was completely fascinated by sounds, how you make them and force things into sounding a certain way. And that's why I love synthesizers so much and why I can invest hours, days, weeks, months, years into making sounds. So synthesizers have always been my best friends. Well, not always, not until I properly learned some of them. So whenever I come across a synthesizer that basically mixes a bunch of different synthesis methods together, I lose my shit. And ButterSynth definitely made me lose my shit. It has everything: Additive, Wavetable, Subtractive, FM, Granular, phase distortion. It's got all of it. And there's so much you can do with it because there's so much modulation in here. And when it comes to the effects, it ticks all of the boxes. In the end, I'd say ButterSynth is for seasoned synthesizer veterans and also for beginners. Synth vets will just love the hybrid nature of ButterSynth and also all of the added modulations, including being able to modulate FX parameters. It's also for synth noobs because, I mean, the UI is really well made and easy to read. There's nice sectioning going on in here, and there is also a PDF manual available online that is very easy to understand. Plus, if you are a noob and you watch this video, then you already know a lot about how to use this synth. And you know, it would be weird for me not mentioning the fact that for people who have been, well, basically screaming their heads off for years and years and years about wanting Serum to be ported over to iOS, I think you can stop now. You can put down your megaphones, have a rest, cause ButterSynth might actually be exactly what you wanted. Now, if you're not one of those people who like sitting down and making sounds with a synthesizer, you just want a new synth with a bunch of awesome sounds in it, well, ButterSynth has you covered there. Hundreds upon hundreds of presets made by some of the best sound designers from within the iOS mobile music community. These guys are absolutely awesome. And if you need more sounds, head on over to Gumroad because there you'll find my 2084 ButterSynth preset pack. I've been working on them very, very hard, and I've made sure to make something very special happen in each and every one of these presets when you modulate the modulation wheel. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching this video, and before you leave, if you want to support the work I do here on YouTube, why don't you give me a thumbs up? And if you want to support me in any other ways, financially or whatever, you can find all of these links here. As usual, I wish you a very productive week. Now go finger all of your stuff and have a lot of fun doing it.